My name is Linda and I'm 32 years old. Last Christmas, I thought I was finally going to have that perfect family dinner where I could share some amazing news. I'd just gotten engaged to the love of my life, David, and I'd also received a promotion at work, one I'd been working toward for 3 long years. I was so excited to tell my family, thinking that maybe this time, just maybe, my mom would finally be proud of me. But instead, what happened that night changed everything between us forever. And honestly, it was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. Before I dive into what went down that Christmas evening, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. Trust me, what my mother said next will shock you. But my response shocked her even more. Growing up, I was always the middle child in a family where being middle meant being invisible. My older brother Michael was the golden boy, the one who could do no wrong in my mother Patricia's eyes. He's a doctor now, and she never lets anyone forget it. My younger sister Karen was the baby, the precious little princess who got away with everything and grew up to become a successful lawyer. And then there was me, Linda, stuck right in the middle, desperately trying to figure out how to earn even a fraction of the attention and love they seem to get so effortlessly. From the time I was old enough to understand family dynamics, I knew I had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. While Michael got praised for bringing home B's, I had to maintain straight A's just to get a nod of acknowledgement. When Karen threw tantrums and broke things, it was cute, and she was just expressing herself. When I so much as raised my voice, I was being disrespectful and needed an attitude adjustment. I remember spending countless hours in high school working part-time jobs at the local grocery store and tutoring younger kids. Not because we needed the money, but because I thought if I could contribute financially, maybe my parents would see my value. I saved every penny to buy my mom flowers on Mother's Day, jewelry for her birthday, and thoughtful Christmas gifts that I'd spend weeks picking out. Michael and Karen would grab something last minute from the mall, and somehow their gifts were always the ones that got the biggest smiles and the longest hugs. College was supposed to be my fresh start, my chance to prove myself in a field I was passionate about. I chose marketing because I love the creativity and strategy behind it, the way you could tell a story that would connect with people and move them to action. But when I told my family about my major, my mother's face fell like I just announced I was dropping out entirely. "Marketing," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "That's not a real career, Linda. That's just playing with pretty pictures and slogans. Why can't you be more like Michael and choose something that actually helps people? Or like Karen, something that requires real intelligence and makes a difference in the world?" Those words stung more than I let on at the time. But I pushed through, graduated with honors, and landed my first job at a small marketing firm downtown. I worked my way up slowly, taking on extra projects, staying late, coming in early, proving myself over and over again. Every small victory, every client I landed, every campaign that succeeded, I'd call home excited to share the news. The conversations always ended the same way. "That's nice, dear. Did I tell you Michael just got published in another medical journal? Or Karen just won another case? She's really making a name for herself." For years I kept trying. I sent cards for every holiday, called every week, remembered birthdays and anniversaries. I helped my parents move into their new house when I was 26, spending my entire vacation time painting walls and organizing boxes while my siblings were too busy with their important careers to help. I dog-sat their German Shepherd whenever they went out of town, even though I'm allergic, and would spend the entire weekend sneezing and taking antihistamines. Last spring, when my dad Robert had to have emergency gallbladder surgery, I was the one who took time off work to drive him to appointments and sit with my mom in the waiting room for 6 hours. Michael was in surgery himself that day, and Karen was in court. But somehow, I was the one who got lectured later about how I should have called them both with updates more frequently. The worst part wasn't even the lack of recognition. It was the constant comparison, the way every conversation somehow circled back to how much more successful, more attractive, more accomplished my siblings were. Family dinners became exercises in endurance. Sitting there listening to endless praise for achievements that honestly weren't any more impressive than my own, but were treated like Nobel Prize wins because they came from the golden children. But this past fall, things in my life finally started clicking into place. David and I had been dating for 2 years, and he proposed during a weekend trip to the mountains in October. The ring was simple but perfect, and more importantly, he saw me in a way my family never had. He celebrated my wins at work, encouraged my creative projects, and never once made me feel like I had to compete for his attention or approval. Around the same time, my company promoted me to senior marketing coordinator, which came with a significant salary increase and the opportunity to lead my own team. It was everything I'd been working toward, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely proud of what I'd accomplished. I couldn't wait to share both pieces of news with my family at Christmas, thinking that maybe this time would be different. Christmas morning started the way it always did at my childhood home on Maple Street. The house was decorated exactly the same way it had been for the past 20 years. White lights on the evergreen tree in the living room, red and gold ornaments that my mother had collected over the decades, and the same angel topper that had been in our family since I was 5. The smell of cinnamon rolls and coffee filled the air, and Christmas music played softly from the old stereo system in the corner. I arrived around 10 in the morning, my arms full of carefully wrapped presents and my heart full of nervous excitement. David was spending Christmas with his own family in Portland, but we'd planned to celebrate together when he got back. I'd been carrying my engagement ring in my purse for the past 2 months, wanting to announce it in person rather than over the phone. My dad greeted me at the door with one of his warm bear hugs. Robert has always been the more emotionally available parent, the one who remembered to ask about my job and actually listened to the answers. "There's my marketing genius," he said, taking the presents from my arms. "How's the new position treating you?" I lit up. "Actually, Dad, I have some really exciting news to share with everyone." "Oh yeah, can't wait to hear it, sweetheart." My mom appeared in the doorway wearing the red cashmere sweater I'd bought her for her birthday last year. She looked me up and down with that expression I knew so well, the one that somehow managed to find fault before I'd even said hello. "Linda, what on earth are you wearing? That green dress makes you look washed out. Didn't I tell you that color doesn't work with your complexion? And your hair looks like you just rolled out of bed." "Merry Christmas to you too, Mom," I said, forcing a smile. "I actually spent an hour on my hair this morning." "Well, you should have spent 2, she replied, turning back toward the kitchen. "Karen looks absolutely stunning in her new navy suit. You should ask her where she shops." My sister Karen was already in the living room, looking indeed gorgeous in a tailored navy outfit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She worked for a prestigious law firm downtown and had the wardrobe to match. Michael was sitting on the couch in his expensive watch and designer sweater, scrolling through his phone and checking messages from the hospital. "Look who finally decided to show up," Karen said with a smirk. "We've been waiting to start presents." "I'm literally 5 minutes late because I stopped to get gas," I replied. But nobody seemed to be listening. The gift exchange went exactly as I'd expected. Michael gave everyone gift cards he'd obviously picked up at the last minute, but they were expensive ones from high-end stores, so Mom gushed about how thoughtful and generous he was. Karen had bought our parents a weekend getaway to some fancy spa resort, which earned her 20 minutes of praise and excited planning conversations. I'd spent weeks picking out personalized gifts for everyone. A vintage record for Michael of his favorite band, a beautiful leather briefcase for Karen with her initials engraved, and a custom photo album for my parents filled with family pictures from the past decade that I digitized and printed myself. "Oh, how nice," my mother said, flipping through the photo album quickly. "This must have taken you some time." "I spent about 40 hours on it," I said. "I had to scan all the old photos and restore some of the damaged ones, then design the layouts and—" "That's sweet, dear. Michael, show everyone that new watch your colleague gave you." And just like that, the conversation moved on. My dad squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "This is beautiful, Linda." "Thank you." But the moment had already passed. As the morning turned into afternoon, more family members arrived. My Aunt Susan and Uncle Frank, my cousins Janet and Robert Jr., and my grandmother Eleanor. The house filled with laughter and conversation, and I found myself gravitating toward the kitchen, helping my mother with dinner preparations like I always did. "The turkey needs to come out in 20 minutes, she instructed, not looking up from the potatoes she was mashing. "And someone needs to set the table." "Where's Karen?" "She's in the living room talking to Grandma Eleanor." "Well, she shouldn't have to worry about kitchen work. She worked so hard during the week." I bit my tongue. I worked just as hard during the week, but somehow that never seemed to factor into these calculations. As dinner time approached, I felt my nerves building. I'd planned to make my announcement during dessert when everyone would be relaxed and in a good mood. I kept touching the ring box in my purse, reminding myself that this was good news, happy news, the kind of news that should bring families together. But as I watched my mother light up every time Michael mentioned his latest case or Karen talked about her recent court victory, I started to wonder if I was setting myself up for disappointment once again. Dinner was served at 3 o'clock sharp, just like every Christmas for as long as I could remember. The dining room table was set with my mother's finest china, the same pattern she'd been using for special occasions since I was a child. Grandma Eleanor sat at one end, my father at the other, and the rest of us filled in the sides according to an unspoken hierarchy that somehow always put me between my youngest cousin and the empty chair where my grandfather used to sit. The conversation flowed easily around topics I'd heard 100 times before. Michael's new medical practice that was expanding faster than he'd anticipated, Karen's recent promotion to junior partner at her law firm, my cousin Janet's wedding planning for next summer. I participated when spoken to, laughed at my Uncle Frank's bad jokes, and complimented my Aunt Susan's new haircut, all while waiting for the right moment to share my own news. "So, Linda," my grandmother said during a lull in conversation, "are you still working at that little advertising company downtown?" "Marketing company, Grandma. And yes, I am. Actually, I have some exciting news about that." Before I could continue, my mother jumped in. "Linda thinks making pretty pictures for businesses is the same as having a real career. I keep telling her she should go back to school for something more substantial like nursing or teaching." "Marketing is a real career, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's actually a field that requires a lot of strategy and analysis. I just got promoted to senior coordinator, which means I'll be leading my own team." And, "Oh, that's wonderful, honey," my Aunt Susan said kindly. "Congratulations." "Thank you. And actually, I have even bigger news than that." I reached into my purse and pulled out the small velvet box, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. This was it, the moment I'd been planning for weeks. "David proposed," I announced, opening the box to reveal the beautiful solitaire ring inside. "We're engaged." The reaction wasn't quite what I'd hoped for. There was a moment of silence, then polite congratulations from most of the table. My father's face broke into a genuine smile, and my grandmother reached over to squeeze my hand, but my mother's expression remained unchanged, almost bored. "When did this happen?" Karen asked. "In October. We went to the mountains for a weekend, and he proposed during a hike to this beautiful overlook. It was perfect." "October," my mother said, her voice sharp. "You've been engaged for 2 months, and you're just telling us now. I wanted to tell you in person as a family." "Well, that's just typical of you, Linda. Always so secretive, always keeping things to yourself. No wonder we never know what's going on in your life." I felt the familiar sting of criticism disguised as concern. "I'm not secretive, Mom. I call every week. I just wanted this to be special." "What does David do again?" Michael asked, though I'd told him at least 3 times in previous conversations. "He's a high school English teacher." "A teacher?" my mother repeated, the word dripping with disappointment. "Well, I suppose that's stable employment at least." The way she said it made it clear what she was thinking. Not impressive enough, not successful enough, not good enough for her daughter. Never mind that David was kind, intelligent, funny, and treated me like I was the most important person in his world. "He's a wonderful man," my grandmother said firmly. "When do we get to meet him properly?" "Soon, I hope. He's with his family in Portland for Christmas, but we're planning to have dinner with everyone next month." "I hope he knows what he's getting into," Karen said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Linda's always been the difficult one in the family." "I'm not difficult," I protested. But my mother was already nodding in agreement. "Linda has always been challenging," she said as if I weren't sitting right there. "She's never quite figured out how to make things easy on herself or anyone else." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I tried to shake them off. This was supposed to be a celebration, a happy moment. I couldn't let them ruin it. "Well, I think it's wonderful news," my father said, raising his glass of wine. "To Linda and David, may you be very happy together." A few people raised their glasses half-heartedly, but the moment felt forced and awkward. The conversation quickly moved on to other topics, and I found myself sitting there with the ring box still in my hands, feeling smaller and more insignificant than ever. As dessert was being served, my mother launched into a detailed account of Michael's latest professional achievements. He'd been featured in a medical journal, invited to speak at a conference in Chicago, and was being considered for a position at the university hospital. Each accomplishment was described in glowing detail, with my mother's pride practically radiating across the table. And Karen, she continued without missing a beat, just won the biggest case of her career. The settlement was in the six figures, and the senior partners are talking about fast-tracking her to full partner. That's amazing, I said, genuinely meaning it. Congratulations, Karen. Thanks, she said, but her attention was already back on her phone. I sat there listening to the praise being heaped on my siblings, waiting for someone to circle back to my engagement or promotion, but it never happened. It was as if I'd never spoken, as if my news didn't matter enough to warrant more than a few seconds of attention. That's when my mother looked directly at me and said the words that would change everything between us forever. You know, Linda, I've been thinking about this engagement of yours, and I have to be honest. I'm worried about David. I mean, what kind of man proposes to you? The table went quiet. Even my cousins looked up from their phones. What do you mean? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. Well, let's be realistic here. You're 32. You work in a job that barely pays the bills. You live in that tiny apartment, and you've never really accomplished anything significant. You're the most useless child we have. I just hope David realizes what he's signing up for before it's too late. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel every pair of eyes at the table staring at me, waiting to see how I would react. My Aunt Susan looked horrified. My father was shaking his head in disbelief. Even Michael and Karen seemed shocked by the cruelty of the comment. But for the first time in my life, instead of shrinking back and taking it, instead of making excuses or trying to laugh it off, I felt something different rising up inside me. It was anger, yes, but more than that, it was clarity. It was 32 years of suppressed frustration and hurt, finally finding its voice. I stood up slowly, my hands trembling with emotion, and looked my mother directly in the eyes. Then stop calling me when you need money, I said, my voice steady and clear, and her face fell. The silence that followed my words was so complete that I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, and the distant sound of Christmas music still playing in the living room. My mother's face went from confident superiority to something I'd never seen before. Genuine shock mixed with what looked like panic. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but her voice had lost all its earlier authority. "I'm talking about the $1,500 I've been sending you every month for the past 2 years to cover your car payments because Dad's business was struggling. I'm talking about the $3,000 I gave you last spring when he needed surgery, and your insurance wouldn't cover all the costs. I'm talking about the $2,000 I sent to help pay for Karen's bar exam fees because she'd already spent her trust fund on that trip to Europe." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, opening my banking app with fingers that were surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Want to see the receipts?" I continued, holding up the screen. "Because I have them all right here, every transfer, every check, every emergency loan that somehow never got paid back." My Aunt Susan was staring at me with her mouth slightly open. My Uncle Frank had put down his fork and was listening intently. My grandmother was nodding slowly as